Good morning, good morning. There's a famous sentence of Joseph Campbell, I'm not referring to Follow Your Bliss, that goes something like this. You know, when you want to locate a quote and something you think you know very well, it disappears from memory. From the page, from the book, it's gone. This is supposedly a trick of Hermes, who is the god who helps you find things suddenly and who helps you forget things suddenly, just as magically, and seems to take over more as you get older. Anyway, the phrase or the quote says, "The gods are not in Greece or in myth books or even in Campbell's books, but are right on the corner of Broadway and 42nd Street, waiting for the lights to change." They are facts of everyday life, not merely the glorious and frightening images printed so beautifully in Campbell's massive works, books almost too heavy to lift, appropriately, I guess, since Joseph Campbell did much of the heavy lifting that brought so much of the body or the corpus of exotic mythology back into our public discourse. Is there something I can do to stop the booming? Tell me. Closer, farther? Okay. He helped resurrect the gods, the facts, into the facts of everyday life. Now, there's a very old question that has haunted the people who are interested in myth, and that is, have the gods truly fled? There was a famous poem by Hölderlin about the gods have fled, and that this in a needy time, in a dürftige Zeit. Even should this indeed be a time of need, a time of impoverished soul, does it necessarily follow that therefore the gods have fled? Can they leave the world at all? That's an even more necessary question. If they are the world as the powers within its variety, how can they be separated from it? Are they not the immortality, the athnetos of the world, giving every item of this world its inherent transcendence, its sublime enchantment, imagination, and beauty? That is at once also fearful, cruel, enigmatic, and profoundly ununderstandable. Why has the modern age accepted the thesis that the gods can simply up and go? Certainly their absence, if that is the case, cannot be due to us, to our having deserted their groves and altars and failed their rituals and sacrifices and forgotten their mysteries. Up to us. They surely cannot be that dependent on what we do or not do. If that were the case, how could they claim their suprahuman authority in the cosmos if their presence or absence depends on our behavior regarding them? The gods of myth are really nothing more than what both Orthodox religion or secular relativism and rationalism insists, fictions of human fantasy. So the question turns again, who and what benefits from declaring the ancient gods dead or fled? Who wants them gone? And with their absence, all pagan feeling, all pagan style of consciousness gone as well. One thing is sure, both historically and logically, the absence of the gods allows the world to become res extensa, as Descartes called it, a mathematical space calculable in forces, adrift with the litter of soulless objects. All soul, all mind, all consciousness condensed inside the human brain, putting nature at the disposal of the human will. The absence of the gods is not only an efficient secular convenience, an industrialist opportunity for exploitation, a hubristic inflation of mortal humans. Much more, the declaration that the gods have fled is also a Christian convenience. Their absence leaves the world open with plenty of room for the presence of Jesus the Savior, who gives his redemptive, apocalyptic answer to the needy times. But who needs redemption, salvation, resurrection? Only the guilty and the dissatisfied. There have been many scholars of religion and history, of myth and literature, of arts and philology who have intimated the survival of the pagan gods, hidden within the Christian mythos, disguised presences despite their official and evident absence. There have been as well many who have attempted the revival of the pagan gods by imitations, by invocations, and by interpretations. Myself, I have followed a method that springs from two famous sentences often used by and quoted from C.G. Jung. The first comes supposedly from Delphi. It is a saying cut in stone and placed as the lintel over the front door of the house where Jung lived and worked for most of his long life. And the sentence is, called or not called, the God will be present. Vocatus atque non vocatus Deus aderit. The second sentence from Jung, the gods have become diseases. Zeus no longer rules Olympus, but rather the solar plexus, and produces curious specimens for the doctor's consulting room, or, often not included in this sentence, but from Jung, or disorders the brains of politicians and journalists who unwittingly let loose psychic epidemics in the world. The interiorization of divinity, the move from transcendence to immanence, had already been argued by Spinoza, for which he was banned from the community. The move was further presented by Heinrich Zimmer, the Indologist, who said, again famously, all the gods are within. And Heinrich Zimmer was Joseph Campbell's first, let's say, mentor, tutor, to whom he apprenticed. These moves, Jung's, Spinoza's, Zimmer's, are each different and different to Jesus's, the kingdom of God is within you. The differentiation of kinds of immanence is not to our point here, but it is important to recognize the crucial twist that Jung's psychology gave to the immanence of the gods. They have been interiorized into pathology. Their myths live in our behaviors, irrepressibly demanding recognition and observances. They bear new names borrowed from the textbooks of psychiatry and abnormal psychology. Their refuge no longer the altar and temple fanum, the site of oracle and mystery cult. Instead, they inhabit the interiority of the psyche, where they make themselves very present indeed as the powers in the background of the soul's infirmities. Since the repressed returns in the strangely inventive form of symptoms, after all, symptoms are extraordinary inventions, the gods are indeed present, whether invoked or not, right on the corner of 42nd Street. I do need to add that Jung is neither the only nor the first of this confluence of the mythological and the pathological, the gods and diseases. Already in 1900, Wilhelm Heinrich Roscher's monograph on Ephialtes, subtitled A Pathological Mythological Treatise, interiorized Pan into our nightmares. Concurrent with Roscher, Freud interiorized Oedipus from a theatrical figure we may watch on the stage to a drive in your personal, intimate body. As well, Freud elevated the mythical personifications Eros and Thanatos to be the dominant gods of all psychological happenings. It is fashionable today to bypass or surpass Freud for all sorts of reasons, sociological, feminist, scientific. But one gift from Freud we ought never neglect, his return to the sources of culture in Mediterranean myths, rooting psychology not in the brain or genetics or blind evolution, but in the poetic basis of mind, whose imagination is structured by mythical configurations, or universali fantastici, as Vico called these archetypal presences. The recognition of the intimate and subtly differentiated connection between myths and pain, between the gods and diseases and politics, is the greatest of all achievements of the Greek mind, singling out that culture from all others, despite its flaws, its faults. That achievement, the Greek perfection of tragedy, which demonstrates directly the mythic governance of human affairs within states, within families, within individuals. Only the Greeks could articulate tragedy to this pitch, and that achievement has not been equaled since. In the Greek sense, we are today in just such a tragedy as Thebes under Oedipus Tyrannos. The king is sick, and in the madness of his sickness, in his profound unconsciousness, the tragedy of the nation lies. Its poverty, its wasted youth, the degeneration of its crops and soil, its water and forests. This was the condition of Thebes at the beginning of Sophocles' first Oedipus play. I quote, "The city wastes in blight, blight on the earth's fruitful blooms and grazing flocks, and on the barren birth pangs of the women. The fever god has fallen on the city and drives it." The fever god in our case today is the same as the one named by Sophocles, line 1911, the fever of the god of war, Ares. And all this because the king is blind to his own nature. In other words, the facts of our collective condition must be laid upon the king. As Henry V reluctantly, ambiguously says, upon the king, our lives, our souls, our debts, our careful wives, our children, and our sins lay on the king. I do not want to overlook the fact that the psychological method I am pursuing, following from Jung and from Campbell, gives scant attention to the historical time frame of the myths, their geographical locations, to the philological analysis of the texts where they are recounted, to the authenticity of their transmission, to the disputed evidence from archaeology, to their sociological and political contexts. In other words, the psychological method I am advancing is shamefacedly syncretistic and may offend the patient devotion to scholarly research by those who come at the same tales with different intentions. To uncover ancient myths and behavior in the phenomena we are unthinkingly absorb as usual reality and utterly unmythical, that is the revelation an archetypal psychology seeks. We ravage the scholarship of others and pilfer whatever we can, justifying these violations in the name of bringing deeper understanding to psychological afflictions. Our method does cast a shadow, a major shadow that wears the bright smile of the new age. Its innocent optimism. Besides, our aim of tying a human mess to a wider myth, we are also attempting to connect present experience to historical culture, something sadly lacking all through the culture today. Hoping to open a long closed door bolted from two sides, history and its scholarship bearing witness only to the dead, the past and gone, and psychology utterly contained within the subjective soul, painfully present and personal. Jung and Campbell, and those of us here who work in this tradition, attempt to show how Western antiquity can be relevant to the life of the psyche and how psychic life can vivify Western antiquity. When scholars speak only to documents and psychologists only to patients, culture languishes, its soul shallow and unrooted in historical knowledge, and its knowledge without soul. Let's go back to 42nd Street. Ain't she sweet walking down the street? Behavior, action, myth, as it moves along unspoken. Remember, the very essence of the word myth is cognate with myen, closed as mystery, as the eyelid closes, and simple expletives like mu, Greek for alas, Sanskrit, mukha, dumb, including also etymological connotations such as mute, mum, mumble, mutter. When we speak myth, we really are not speaking myth, but mythology, the logos or telling of myth. For myth is action, or as some theories say, myth follows from ritual or is embodied in ritual. Moreover, myth gives the certitude of action, such as we easily recognize when possessed by the goddess of sexual love or blinded with martial fever. Just this very idea that myth gives the certitude of action is made clearer by the work of Vico, that extraordinary man and one of my dearest heroes, who lived and worked in Naples in the early half of the 18th century. And maybe it was the fall he suffered at age of 7 that cracked his head open and kept him from school for 3 years, that freed him from the science of the time and its education and its ideas of truth, freed him from Newton and Descartes and Galileo, and allowed him to found the mind in myth and lay out another idea of certitude versus truth. Certitude is the concrete engagement with life, and it precedes all the principles and theories and interpretations or the truth that we find for the certitudes. The facts of 42nd Street precede our verification of them in thought or law. We live myth before we declare it to be myth, myth which might only appear in reflection or translated into a story. The existential engagement is already a certitude, action for itself and in itself the certitude of immediacy. My urge to fly sunward above it all with Icarus, my unknown union with my mother, like Oedipus, my unapproachable distancing, intactness, like Artemis, my aggressive attack on dirt and bestial monsters, like Hercules, the unworried smile and the charming allure I bring to every encounter, like Aphrodite. Before verum or truth and all arguments about truth, myths are the ongoing fantasies concurrent with our behaviors, myths enacted in the ceremonies of habitual performance and daily patterns of expression and perception, embodied in human behavior. We need to look again at Oedipus. Myth is this certainty or certitude that goes on unthinkingly in each of our actions. And as Isaiah Berlin says when he's talking about Vico, it is myth that gives us the sense of reality. So reality is not the absence of myth or the contrary of myth, it is our immersion in myth is reality. So early in the play, Oedipus the king says, "Well, I know you are all sick, and in your sickness none among you as sick as I. Your pain comes to none other than myself." Oedipus Tyrannus, the king, has taken on the city and its people as himself. He calls them his children. He identifies his condition with theirs. He is the city and its people. We are dealing, however, with something beyond the symbolic significance of kingship, and rather with the interpenetration of sickness among the polis, the city, the people, and the individual. All are sick together, individuals, community, and government. Private and public cannot be separated. The gods do not affect individuals and families alone or only human beings. They affect the land, the crops, and the herds, and the institutions of state. A city, too, can be pathologized by mythical factors, exactly what Jung said in Wotan in 1936, looking at Germany. The gods live in the polis. The king, whether in Thebes or in Texas, how does a city act when it is sick? What moves do its rulers make? What notions of remedy arise from a sick city? And the play Oedipus gives us answers. First, the sick city calls upon the leader to find remedy, equating the king with the city. Oedipus Tyrannos. The government is responsible. The people are children. Second, the leader calls on Apollo to reveal the cause and the cure. Oedipus says, I sent away unto Apollo's halls to find what I might do or say to save the state. The government turns to Apollonic consciousness, Apollonic means of diagnosis and correction, whether Thebes or Texas. And the government speaks in God's name. Quote from the play, God proclaimed now to me, for me and God and for our land. Third, the city purges. Oedipus says, quote, I will disperse this filth. Oedipus speaks of purification, expulsion, punishment. He curses those who would not obey him. Quote, I forbid that man, whoever he may be, my land, and I forbid any to welcome him, or cry him greeting, or make him a sharer in sacrifice or offering to the gods, or give him water for his hands to wash. I command all to drive him from their homes, since he is our pollution. Fourth, the sick city makes edicts. Oedipus says, I forbid, I command, I invoke this curse. In these early passages of the play, he speaks as the voice of the city. Oedipus, the king, is the state, an utterly public figure. These four solutions, and let me repeat them in brief, a single answer to a complex question. The appeal to Apollo, the language of pollution and expulsion, and apodictic declarations in God's name. These supposed solutions are actually manifestations of the city's sickness. They are diagnostic signs. The solutions imagined by a patient for his illness belong to the image of his illness. That is why therapists listen closely to what the patient wants at the beginning of therapy. How the patient imagines remedy and what measures he is already pursuing show how the patient is constellated by his condition. The solutions to the problem of Thebes present the problem of Thebes. The simplistic Apollonic solutions to America's disease are part of the disease itself. The classically ritual solution could only be sacrifice of the king. I have turned to one basic, and sacrifice of the king means more than the capacity to admit a mistake, which even that's missing. I have turned to one basic tragic tale, Sophocles' Oedipus the Tyrant, to expose the myth we are now struggling in. There are others, such as the story the exclusionist followers of Jesus are absorbed by, the story of Armageddon, the final chapter of the Christian Bible, which envisions the final chapter of the planet's life. This archetypal tale is a myth of horror and terror, of flames and plagues, and an avenging Christ's white robe dripping with the blood of his enemies. A myth, too, that gives certitude and belief in it urges action. Whereas it might rather be a self-fulfilling prophecy or an antiodromia or a revelation of the self-destruction of the Christian Bible at the end of an aeon. We can see. What we can and must learn from Joseph Campbell is that myth is all about us on every street corner. Myth is reality, and recognition of this certitude, analysis of the myths at work among us, may keep us from falling prey to blind belief and the disasters of delusion. For we are in a collective madness, all of us, even here in this Grand Hyatt. Thank you.